wonder if I can make a comment. By the way, it was a fascinating talk, a really interesting talk. I admire the clarity with which you spoke. And my self-concept tells me I can't match that clarity. But I will do my best. By the way, it seems to me that the husband had a wonderful self-concept. His wife, if I may say so, was living with the perfect role model for her. But the point I want to make is this. You talked about the integration of mind and body. I am a little unhappy with that phrase, because I think it goes more than that it's unity of mind and body. And I'm concerned that the phrase integration of mind and body doesn't go far enough in emphasizing the indivisibility of mind and body. And in this connection, it seems to me that we use the word individual wrongly. We use the word individual to separate the individual from the group. We say, he's an individual and he's a member of a group and so forth. We distinguish him from the group. And that seems to me to be a collectivist way of looking at the individual. Actually, the word individual means undivided, individual. And that's the way we should be using the word individual, rather than the way we normally use it. What do you think about that, Scott?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I especially like the idea of the unity of one's mind and body. But just to make sure I understood your second point, so instead of using the word individual, you would use what word?
No, I would use the word individual to mean a person who is unified in mind and body. He's united. We tend to use the word individual to separate a person from a group. And that seems to me to be a group way of thinking.
Because you're using the group as the standard from which someone is separated.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I appreciate that comment. And in fact, maybe in future talks, pointing out that unity idea and speaking of an individual in the unified way would be a better way to describe those kinds of things. Thank you.
Sir. Is consciousness free will?
Well, my understanding of it is that free will is an attribute of consciousness. Consciousness is your awareness of reality, but with a conceptual and a volitional consciousness, that's what it can do. That's how it can act. So that's, in brief, the distinction I see. But they're, I mean, in a sense, you can't pull them apart. One is an aspect of the other. Yeah, consciousness is your awareness. Free will is what you can do with your mind, your choice to think or not.
So an increase in consciousness is an increase in free will?
I don't think free will is an issue of proportions or degrees. I think we all have free will, except in the case we have some terrible brain disease that's, you know, interfering with those processes. Schizophrenia is an example. But I think what you could say is that through more and more use of your free will, you have a more and more expanded consciousness, because consciousness in some ways is like a muscle. You use it more, the more it gets, plus you gain more knowledge, you gain more concepts, more understanding of the relationship between things. So I think that's where size and measurement in terms of size comes in. But I think free will is not something that's measured that way. I don't think so. What do you think about it? Did that make sense, though?
Yeah. And then, how does efficacy tie into that? Is it subjective, or is that?
It's not subjective. I mean, you could have the basic standard of life and death. You know, actions that have survival value and further life, objectively, you want to engage in. Actions that interfere with or are detriment to life or are self-destructive. You don't want to do those. And I mean immediately. There's always intermediate cases of smoking and some other kinds of behaviors people do that are not healthy for you, but they're not going to kill you overnight. So that's one standard, what forwards your life or what causes harm to your life. But within each individual, you have to accept the standards and efficacy appropriate to who you are. I can't be an NBA basketball player. I can't be an offensive lineman for a football team. It's not possible to me. Or if I tried, I would get killed, and that would be against my life. So there are those kinds of standards within the context of an individual's life, and you have to have realistic standards that are appropriate to you. But again, the objective standard is this forwarding my life? Is it moving my life backwards or hurting my life? So that's, to my mind, the general basic standard. Mike?
When somebody begins to realize that they have a mistaken premise and a mistaken value, standard of value, how, at first I imagine it's very difficult to change that. I mean, if you start out with the standard of intelligence that you're some, an Albert Einstein, some incredible genius scientist, when you begin to realize that that's your standard of value, probably the first thing that would come to that person's mind is that I need to, lower my standard of value. And I imagine that, just that phrase sounds like I gotta bring down my standard. But I imagine that's going to create a lot of difficulty in changing it. What they're really doing is making it more realistic. But that's probably how they see it, is just bringing down.
They're bringing themselves down, is what you're saying. Yeah, no, I understand your point, and it's not easy to change a premise, and that's why I said if someone tries to undertake that process on his own but isn't having success, it's not proof of his inability to do something, because it's hard. If I told you that instead of Mary had a little, pick your word, nose, and every time I said that, you had to think of nose, you would have to put forth a lot of mental effort. Some things get ingrained and automatized. And that's just a simple example. But when you think of a premise and all the behavioral criteria that go along with that, and the actual engaging in those behaviors time and time and time again, it's like when you rub a grain into wood. And I actually think that's an apt analogy because of the brain and what I understand about firing of neurons and patterns. When you repeatedly do something at the brain level, at the level of neurons and the patterns, they actually have different strengths of signal exchange. And so it is like it becomes hardwired in some ways. But that's what's fascinating about consciousness, is that first of all, you can get that brain going, but with enough effort, you can change that. You can change the physiological structure of your own brain to some extent. I don't mean like you can just tap some buttons in the side of your head and all of a sudden you got a new brain. But the point is, all that stuff got there through experience and thinking involves free will and active mental effort. You can change the physiological structure in terms of the pattern of firing neurons in your brain. That's amazing to me, but that's what we can do.